Audio made possible by www.jackettome.com. Warning. The following has suggestive content that is not suitable for some listeners. Audio Fanfiction Productions presents Wide Awake. Fanfiction written by Angskata003. Fanfiction inspired by the Twilight Saga written by Stephanie Meyer. Chapter 36. Valentine Pineapple Pears. Bella's point of view. I stared into his hooded green eyes, sitting on his lap, in nothing but a skirt and a bra, while my fingers meandered through his messy bronze hair. It felt like silk between my fingers as I combed it back lazily from his smooth forehead. He dragged his tongue across his red, swollen top lip as I shifted slightly on top of him. I couldn't really help it. I could feel him so much closer through nothing but my panties as my skirt spilled out over his lap, and the air between us surged and crackled with an unfathomable charge. It was something I hadn't taken into account, and the feel of it made me ache for more. The need to feel something, anything, was so overwhelming that I sucked my bottom lip into my mouth and bit it hard to stop from writhing against him. I should have known that he'd be giving himself unicorns, but I had never really thought about it. And if I had to look up since, I probably shouldn't be thinking of it at all. Especially right now as I straddle him topless and hopelessly aroused, with no chance of getting a unicorn myself. Of course I was appropriately mortified by even admitting I had tried. Only once. And I didn't get far before I felt ridiculous and frustrated. And I had to admit it to Edward himself, which made me feel utterly horrified. And still hopelessly aroused when I thought about how I shouldn't be horrified, because he did it too. Then it was just full circle, sitting in his lap with the pretty horse necklace he had given me hanging around my neck, and my scantily clad bottom sitting in the gap his crossed legs had created. It was the sweetest kind of torture, staring into his eyes and growing wet between my legs as I stroked his hair and pressed my teeth harder into my lip to restrain myself from finding friction. He had no idea what he was doing to me when he looked at me like that. Hooded, lust, want, and yet still concern and love. He darted his eyes to my bottom lip as his warm thumbs twitched on my bare sides.
Do you want me to do it for you?
He asked in a calm whisper, never breaking his gaze from my lip as I bit it. It took a moment as I stared at him longingly to realize what he was even referring to. Because my head was so clouded with uninvited visions of him touching himself, and touching me, and rubbing me, which finally gave his question meaning. I painfully yanked my lip from teeth, as a large gust of air escaped in near his and I clenched my jaw. Please? I ground out, battling with the urge to fist my hands into his hair as I massaged his scalp. It was pathetic for me to beg for it, but I didn't care. Because the thought of his hands on me one more time trumped any reservations I may have been feeling. His thumbs pressed into my sides as he met my gaze. The need was there for him too, though he tried to hide it. I could see it in his green eyes as the muscles in his jaw contracted slightly. He sighed deeply through his nose as if he were steeling himself for his actions. And all I could do was plead with my gaze as my hips moved against my will yet again. I forced my eyes shut and weaved my fingers across his scalp roughly. He gripped my sides tighter.
Above or under?
He asked in a voice less controlled as I felt his thumbs twitch again. I opened my eyes as I convinced myself that I was breathing steadily through my nose. And his gaze was cast downwards into my lap. I followed it there, landing onto my red gauzy skirt that was ruffled between us, and I wanted to moan and laugh and hug him. Because I was just so freaking thankful that under was even an option. Under. I breathed in certainty. Definitely under. His whole hand jerked lightly on my side as his jaw muscles twitched from underneath his skin. I was equally as excited with the notion that I would be able to touch him again. With that particular thought in mind, I lowered a hand from his hair to his bare stomach, fingering the softly scarred skin below his belly button, where hair would normally linger for a guy. I watched as his gaze slowly climbed up from my lap to my bare stomach, to my red bra, where it lingered momentarily, then further up to the necklace hanging above my breasts, to my throat, to my lips, and finally rested on my eyes.
This isn't fucking about me,
he said in a tone that was meant to sound final. As if he were convincing both of us. It was a look and tone I had come to know rather well. And my face fell a little when I realized he wouldn't let me touch him too. I was much looking forward to that part. But I couldn't possibly object. I needed it far too badly to claim any high ground, where desperation was concerned. So I grudgingly nodded, moving my hand back up to his hair, and pathetically incapable of opposing his orders. He had the power. His face remained perfectly composed as one of his hands began the descent down my side rigidly, leaving a warm trail in its wake, as it descended to my hip, and faltered momentarily as it met the HE material of the red skirt against my thigh. I stared into his green eyes as my stomach seized in anticipation, and my fingertips resumed kneading his scalp, feeling his hand move down my thigh stiffly, pausing once he reached mine, resting on the mattress against his hip, and winding around to slide to the bare skin of my calf. I ground my teeth as he ducked his hand underneath my skirt, his other hand on my side twitching again, as he began the slow ascent up my leg. I could feel his breathing change with mine as his smooth, warm palm glided upwards to my thigh. My fingers in his hair jerked and faltered in my massage as the dark green of his eyes became lightly glazed over and his thumb pressed into my side. Through my periphery, I could see his chest moving, heaving with his breaths as they changed and deepened. I wanted to press my breast against him and match his breaths with my own as I felt his palm drift upward slowly. I could feel the cool air drift up my skirt as its gauzy fabric bunched around his forearm, exposing mine as I gripped the knuckles of my fingers together almost painfully in his hair. He was going too freaking slow, and my eyes must have shown my impatience, because the trail veered to my inner thigh as it crept up, and I finally felt his thumb come to rest just below the elastic of the red, lacy panties, in between my legs. Thank God for Elisa's matching underwear rule. My stomach tightened in impatience as we stared into each other's eyes. He was blatantly trying to maintain a controlled expression as his thumb softly caressed the sensitive skin where it rested, giving me a light shiver as tingles rested at my center. The room was so quiet that the only sounds permeating the atmosphere were my ragged breaths as I ground my teeth together, and the sound of a light patter against the roof as the rain began to fall outside. I could see Edward's throat jump as he swallowed and held my gaze. And right before I thought I might just scream for him to do it already, the thumb on my thigh suddenly left my skin and skimmed the fabric of my panties. I exhaled sharply as my hips involuntarily jerked and I gripped his hair tighter in between my fingers. Cookie. I breathed tersely through clenched teeth. And I wasn't tense because of the minute amount of panic that rose inside of my chest, but because I had to wait to feel it again. His expression never changed as he moved his thumb back to its position, rubbing the skin gently as I tried desperately to calm my ragged breaths. His intense green eyes never left mine as I relaxed as much as physically possible under the strain of my need and used my fingers to once again comb his hair back from his forehead soothingly. I don't even know who I was trying to soothe by the gesture, but the feel of his hair relaxed me more. I could see the second time coming as his throat jerked with another quiet swallow, unintentionally alerting me I was rewarded when his thumb finally lifted from my thigh again and grazed the soft, covered flesh once more. Edward's face was washed in my breath as my lips parted in an uneven sigh, and my shoulders collapsed. The most embarrassing sharp purr sounded from the back of my throat as I pushed farther into his thumb and tangled my fingers deeper into his hair without needing the safe word. I watched the fine crease form between his eyebrows as his eyelids slid closed and he finally lifted his entire palm to press into me. A deep, throaty moan slipped from my lips as I felt his warmth against me, my curly hair falling around my bare shoulders with a tickle to my stomach that made me shiver. All I could do was allow my forehead to fall against his as my chest heaved, my breast barely touching his chest with every deep inhale. My fingers in his hair weaved lazily as I sighed, and writhed against his still palm willingly. I was rather surprised to hear his soft groan as he pushed back into my ride. I was hoping the dampness between my legs wasn't seeping through the thin fabric as I shifted against him once more, biting my lip, and watching his eyes shift slowly behind his eyelids. I wanted to feel myself flush against him, feel his heartbeat, and determine if it was racing like mine was. So I tried moving closer to him. Close enough to just barely push my breast against him, but far enough away to give his palm space to move unrestricted. The need was building inside of me in overwhelming amounts as I was surrounded and covered by Edward and his scent. A disparate, high-pitched whisper escaped from my lips as he moved against me, and I watched his eyelids longingly. Wishing that he would look at me, wishing that he would enjoy it half as much as I was. Wishing that the panties I was wearing were thinner so I could feel his hand against me completely. He exhaled raggedly into my face as his palm began moving against me harder. I wasn't pulling on his hair or biting into his neck to break his carefully crafted will and control. I couldn't because I was so afraid of him stopping as I continued writhing against his palm and watching his eyes dance behind his eyelids, bathing his face in my uneven pants and sighs as he remained completely still with the singular exception of his hand. I was barely positive he could feel the dampness by that point. Suddenly, the movement of his hand changed as his thumb gently pressed into my most sensitive area. I whimpered loudly against his forehead, pushing back against it as I bit my lip painfully in between my teeth. Without any warning, his eyelids slowly lifted. They gazed back at me with a very particular glint, making me whimper once more. His lips were heavy and hooded, and his glazed, green eyes were unusually darkened. And as if he knew just what the whimper meant, he suddenly sprang to life. A large gust of his warm breath met me as the hand on my side shakily slid up hand underneath my hair to grab my breast. Before I could even react, he crushed his lips to mine, forcing me to release my bottom lip from my teeth as he sucked it into his mouth and ran his thumb across the peak of my breast coarsely. I moaned against his lips, finally fisting my hands into his hair as I forced my tongue into his mouth fiercely. A gritty sound came from the back of his throat as he tilted his head, plunging his tongue deeper forward into me as his palm moved between my legs with more rigidity. His hands trembled, and I grew warmer at the feel of it. He was holding back. He was letting go. And I didn't know how much he was letting go, but it was enough to make me melt even further into his touch as our tongues fought against each other eagerly. The taste of him in my mouth was intoxicating as we pushed and pulled and shifted and gripped. It was wet and warm and embarrassing when I moaned into his mouth against my will. It was different from the meadow because I could feel him squeezing my breast and banding into my mouth. He wasn't making all of the sounds I was dying to hear. But he was letting go. He could have stopped and stiffened and pulled away as we both grew impossibly more aroused under my red-tiered skit. Like he always did. But he didn't. And the kisses and touches grew more urgent as he gasped huskily and fought against my tongue, with trembling hands enveloping me. But I wanted to feel more, and nothing was stopping us from both getting what we obviously wanted. Nothing except for Edward. I was going to have to take the initiative. He would never allow it to escalate past a point he felt I